Welcome to the water sector. We're better. We're better than an F. I am Reese Tisdale, and this is Future of Water, in which we talk about all the ways in which companies, utilities, and people are addressing the challenges and opportunities in water. This is episode 73, and I think it's going to be a good one. Today, I'm talking to Bluefield Research Director Eric Bindler about the state of the water industry. In recent weeks, both AWWA and Black Veatch have released their industry surveys, which I think are annual. They're surveys of the market, and we thought it might be interesting to dig in a little bit, provide some cliff notes, if you will, and share some Bluefield perspectives. So we're going to bring Eric in for that, and then I'm going to have Charlie Suse come on in just a minute, and we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening outside of the U.S. I'll leave it a secret about what we're going to talk about, and we'll bring him in for just a couple of minutes to give a plug for some research he's been doing. So with that being said, let's go ahead and bring Eric into this conversation and dig into the state of the water industry. All right, so I'm joined here by Eric Bindler, fresh back from, well, I shouldn't say fresh, he's back from paternity leave, at least partly. So he is afternoon, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed to give us a little discussion on the state of the water industry. Eric, how's it going?
It's going, yeah. I wouldn't use fresh to describe my perspective right now, but I'm hanging in there, getting sleep where I can, and excited to be kind of diving back into what's going on in the water industry.
Well, my theory on people who have children is you forget how truly dark it is and sleepless in those early days, and for some reason you have more children. Which, if everybody remembered, if our memories were good enough, if we were like elephants, we would, the species would die. But so here we are. Glad you're here, and let's talk. It's been a while in any case because you've been out and we've been talking to other people within Bluefield. So one of the things that's come up, obviously, or two things specifically, is the state of the water industry. And there have been two surveys that have come out. AWWA and Black Veatch have put out sort of, I think, their annual reports on what's happening in the water industry. They survey utilities. It's a pretty big number. I think you have the details. But what I was hoping is we could have a brief conversation about what do these surveys tell us? Are there any takeaways, at least from Bluefield's perspective, on what's happening and so on. So before we dig into the details, why don't you give me sort of the elevator pitch for what these surveys are all about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you described it well. These are two annual surveys that I don't know that they're usually coming out or at the same time, but for whatever reason, I think they came out on like the same day, if not the same week. And that's the American Water Works Association State of the Water Industry. This is the 20th edition, so it's a big deal. I think they were kind of ramping up in preparation for ACE, which has been going on in Toronto this week. And then Black Veatch also does these strategic directions reports for different industries that they cover, one of which is water. Both are kind of heavy on surveys. They're both mainly kind of US or North America focused, largely geared towards water, wastewater, stormwater utilities, although I think they do also both capture other industry players, right? So consultants or, vendors, engineering firms, whatever the case may be. So you get kind of a mix of perspectives, but mainly utility focused. And a lot of the questions are really geared towards how utilities are addressing different challenges and how they're seeing different kind of, macro trends in the industry. So they're both really interesting. I think, AWWA has about 4,000 participants this year. The Black Veatch one is about 450 respondents. So, pretty decent numbers. And every year they kind of mix up what they're asking about based on just what people are talking about in the industry, what some of the major news events are or trends that utilities are facing. And so there's a lot of really good stuff in here in terms of just, obviously we talk about these issues all the time, whether it be climate or funding trends or supply chain or workforce, but it's always really helpful to get some kind of raw numbers on how utilities in particular are seeing this stuff and how they're thinking about it and what's really driving the conversation on their end.
Yeah, and I think, this is a little bit different than prior years. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, in that the tailwinds seem to be a bit stronger in many respects, given what's happening in the market from, Western water, but maybe even more broadly and more impactful is IIJA and IRA, Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act. So there's a lot of money flowing into the municipal market, among other things. Plus, there are other stresses, whether it be financial climate, et cetera, et cetera. So things seem to be, as far as energy in the space, I haven't spoken to our colleagues who were in Toronto in great detail about what happened at ACE. But as far as the surveys go, what are some overall takeaways that you sort of glean from pouring through these reports?
Yeah, so I'd say one of the two top level takeaways is both of these surveys kind of ask for a cross-cutting perspective on what utilities and industry players see as the biggest challenges facing the industry. And they're actually pretty similar, which is interesting. Both the AWWA survey and the Black Veatch survey identify aging infrastructure as number one. And AWWA, actually, they ask this question every year, for presumably the past 20 years, although in the report they only show the last 5 or so. But aging infrastructure is just always every year the top issue, which makes sense. I mean, we talk about it all the time. It's kind of this perennial thing in the industry. For Black and Veatch, aging industry also, top concern. Funding and financing is also in the top 3. It's number 3 in both surveys. It's the third highest issue. And what's interesting, though, is that for AWWA, this is the first year in the past 5 that long-term water supply actually overtook funding and financing for the number 2 spot. So it has been, the aging infrastructure number 1, actually paying for addressing that aging infrastructure has been number 2. But I think to your point a couple minutes ago, on the one hand, we do have more money flowing into the sector. There's this kind of bullishness around the IIJA and all of the funding. And on the other hand, I think we've just there's been so much in the news lately about drought, about Western water issues, that actually the concerns around water supply have surpassed the concerns around funding for the first time in at least 5 years. I think that's really interesting. And then on the Black and Veatch side, number 2 is actually aging workforce, which is another thing that we've talked a lot about, right? It's kind of one of these perennial issues in the sector. But it's gotten, I think, a lot worse in the past couple of years due to COVID, due to retirements related to that, due to the Great Resignation. We've done podcasts and webcasts and research notes and all kinds of stuff on that issue, so I won't go into too much detail. But it does put things in perspective. The Black and Veatch survey mentions that 82% of the respondents have seen an increase in retirements and staff turnover, from a pretty high baseline, right? This is not by any means a new issue, and we're still seeing so many players in the industry seeing more of an increase and more of an issue with workforce and with retirements.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I do think obviously Western water in the news, dollars going to that. I mean, even in places like, the lower Colorado basin, now we're going to start paying farmers to start using less water. Well, that's not municipally focused, but also there is going to be a lot more funding going towards that area, but also the aging workforce. I mean, it's just such a crazy environment when it comes to workforce, whether, we're seeing tech layoffs. I mean, I remember a year or 2, maybe even 3 years ago. I mean, I know you've been having conversations over time with like engineering companies who are having trouble bringing in engineers because some of them are going to the tech sector. They're getting higher salaries or higher paying jobs in other segments. Now, is there a resetting of the market? We'll see. Still a lot of inflationary pressure on salaries, basically, overall. And so the water sector, given where it is, very mature, unable to sort of ramp up and ramp down salary scales like other sectors. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And now also people are also just getting back into the office too, right? That's been sort of a push and pull of impact on the space overall. So, I mean, one question I have for you is, I mean, when you were looking at it, what about sort of overall optimism? Any guidance that they provide at a high level?
Yeah, the AWWA survey, that's kind of another question that I think they put in there every year for, at least the past several years, when they kind of try to gauge the optimism of the sector. And so it's pretty high at this point. It's at, it's kind of an arbitrary scale, but at 5 out of 7 is where they put it this year, which is an increase from last year. And I think, overall sentiment in the sector was kind of down in the dumps around 2016, 2017. For whatever reason, it things have really picked up even through COVID and through all of the supply chain issues and through all the workforce issues, just I think with some of those tailwinds that you pointed out related to funding, related to just maybe greater public awareness, attention, appreciation for the work that happens in the water industry, we're seeing this optimism a little bit higher. And then on the flip side of that, there's a kind of a separate section in there for companies, right? Not for utilities, but for supply chain players, for for vendors, for engineering firms, for the kind of private sector component of the industry, asking about revenues. And one of the things I thought was interesting was that about 2/3 of those players are expecting revenue growth in 2023, positive revenue growth in 23. So again, that's obviously not everybody, but a decent majority is kind of expecting forward momentum this year in terms of their sales, in terms of their revenues, which is obviously heartening from our perspective.
So not to rain on the parade, but 5 out of 7 is a C.
That's fair.
So, but maybe that's just hey, it's all relative, right? I only say that it's like I feel like I'm talking to my children who are 11 and 13. It's like, hey, how'd you do? I got 5 out of 7. It was awesome. It's like, well, not quite. So,
well, looking back, I mean, as far as 2004, it's never gone above a 5. Well, it was like 5.25 last year. So that's around, definitely better than it has been. I don't know. I have no idea how that is evaluated, but it's definitely better, more optimistic than the industry has been. Maybe we're just kind of a pessimistic industry, and we're never going to be fully at 100% happy. But
welcome to the water sector. We're better. We're better than an F.
Yeah, exactly.
So no, I like it. I think in all seriousness, I know we're being facetious and cynical and all of the above, but I think it is positive. And from our perspective, I think generally speaking, when we speak to vendors, engineering firms in particular, I think there is a real positive sentiment out there that people do fit. They're busy. There are a lot of bids or RFPs coming in. There's funding out there. The question is, how fast is the funding rolling out? We know that it is like IIJA, it is rolling out. We're tracking that on a quarterly basis. So overall, I think things are positive. The tailwinds are strong. And that doesn't even necessarily include maybe partly what's happening in the industrial and or corporate space, right? There's a lot happening there where, corporations and industries are also additionally or increasingly focusing on water management overall. So I think it's super positive. So those are the high level points, Eric. What about it's pretty dense, right? We've looked through these things. It's a lot of numbers, percentages, et cetera. What are some favorite takeaways that you have? What jumps out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, the questions and the, specific data points cover a lot of really interesting topics that we talk about a lot, at Bluefield and with our clients. And so, there's a few that I wanted to kind of call attention to. I'd say the first kind of bucket that's really interesting is the sustainability and climate space. And so there's a couple of data points from the Black Veatch survey, about 2/3 of the utility respondents say that sustainability is a critical focus of theirs, a critical strategic focus. But at the same time, also 2/3, 67%, don't have any plan or any idea as to when their organization is going to be carbon neutral. There's only about 10% of the respondents said that they'd get there within 15 years, which is, not the I guess if you're talking net zero by 2050, you're still there. But the fact that there's so much, I think, strategic or so much realization that the industry needs to focus on sustainability, but at the same time, very little actual kind of pen to paper plans in place as far as cutting emissions, cutting carbon, cutting energy, especially cutting, like, for example, methane and nitrogen, or nitrous oxide, I should say, in the wastewater treatment space. We talk about this a lot. The water utility sector has kind of traditionally seen climate as something that they're kind of a victim of in a lot of ways, right? That they need to adapt to changing precipitation patterns and water availability and extreme weather. And that's all true. But at the same time, the industry also does, contribute a decent, a small, but a meaningful share of global greenhouse gas emissions, especially when you're talking about things like methane. And so there's, I think, the largest, most progressive, most kind of innovative utilities are thinking more and more about their own carbon footprint, but that's still very much the minority case, right? And like I said, the majority of utilities here have absolutely no plans or no idea as to when they're going to get to a point of net neutrality, of net zero, reducing that footprint meaningfully.
Yeah, and I think also some of this, a lot of these initiatives are also taking place even at a higher level, at the municipal level, rather than just the utility itself. I know we've done some analysis of cities around the US. I don't know, it was like 30 or so, which ones had plans in place and what were they targeting, whether it be emissions, energy management. And that, quite honestly, for those who haven't seen it, it was or still remains one of our more popular deliverables out there when we look at downloads and clicks, if you will. And I've seen it used in different presentations among engineering firms as they evaluate opportunities beyond just water. But it's really interesting. All right, so that's climate. So interesting. So what about other takeaways? Are there any good tidbits that you took away from the reports?
Yeah, another kind of bucket that I'd point to would be water supply issues, right? Like we kind of mentioned that already. The AWWA survey found that only about 55%, so only a little bit more than half of utilities are either very prepared or fully prepared to meet their long-term water supply needs. That number's been ticking down over the past couple of years. And in the Black and Veatch survey, about a quarter of utilities say that they wouldn't be able to provide water to a new industrial, like a large new industrial facility in their service area. Like that, a quarter of utilities unable to service some sort of major new industry, which is really interesting. And I think that really resonates with what we're seeing in the news. I mean, you look at the news recently about Phoenix, right? Kind of limiting construction activity, new residential development due to just a lack of water supply, right? Just not knowing where you're going to get the water to service those new buildings, those new subdivisions. We're seeing, I think, increasingly, especially in the West, but more broadly, I think we're seeing this kind of coming to terms with the fact that you can't have economic growth, you can't have population growth, you can't have development without water, right? And so parts of the country that are really facing this long-term supply crunch are kind of coming to terms with that realization. And so that in and of itself, I mean, again, a quarter of utilities unable to service major new economic activity, major new industrial activity is really kind of eye-opening.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. Like, let's say you're the mayor of a city or, city council, and you want a big business to come. I mean, I think a lot of communities want big business, right? It's, for a lot of employment, et cetera. And you have to turn around and say, like, sorry, we can't do it. We don't have enough water supply. Or, what does that drive? I mean, ideally, that'll drive reuse or alternative water supplies or other efficiency measures. But yeah, it's a little scary,
right? And I should say that number is not only due to water supply, it's also related to, they cut it up into like unable to serve industry because of supply or because of like infrastructure capacity, right? So it also speaks to the other side of the coin, which is, we need more dollars going into our infrastructure. But if you're thinking about courting a new data center or a semiconductor fab or whatever the case may be, all of these industries that we're talking about, a food and beverage manufacturing facility, again, you need water. You need to be able to site your facility in a place where there is water. And so if so many communities out there just don't have the water supply, don't have the infrastructure to do that, then where are we going to see growth? Where are we going to see all of this investment that's planned in the clean energy economy and in the digital economy, the tech economy? Where's it going to be if so many communities can't support it from a water perspective?
Yeah, no, I think it's, in your point about Arizona, what's happening out there is a good example. There's a lot of conflict. We've done a fair amount of research on that over the past couple of months. So, okay, give me a third.
All right, so a third, let's look at supply chain. So obviously another topic that we've been talking about for a couple of years now. This, in the AWWA survey was identified as just like the top challenge, right? The top negative driver or negative force on the industry this year. 92% of respondents saw delays in their supply chains, which is, again, like that's one of the highest numbers in any of these surveys, that that many utilities in such a diverse, such a kind of sprawling and fragmented industry are seeing these issues. And it's also kind of it's translating into rate pressure as well. I think one of the things that was interesting was that almost 80% of the utilities in the survey expect to raise rates in the next year. which is up from only about 2/3 2 years ago, right? So, again, in a sector, especially when we're talking about municipal utilities that are very slow, very resistant to raise rates due to the kind of political pressures and forces associated with that, that the inflationary pressures and the supply chain pressures have been so bad that such a significant majority are actually going to be raising rates in the next year. I think that's really telling.
Yeah, I wonder how much of, I think the supply chain impacts, they're definitely real. I wonder how much of this also is this, I don't know, is this, a byproduct of the Amazon effect, right? Everybody expects everything delivered in 24 hours now. I know, whether it be pipes and valves and pumps, that's a different category. No one's getting that through their Prime membership at Amazon. But that being said, I like mentally, subconsciously, everybody's thinking, oh, things are moving faster, supply chains are. And there has been a bit of a whipsaw effect, partly because of COVID and the ramp up and ramp down across the board. So that's really interesting. 92% is incredibly high. I agree with you there. Interesting. Anything else? What else you got?
Yeah, I got two more. So the fourth one is funding. This again is something we've talked about, in a lot of different forums. Obviously, with IIJA, with all of this money flowing into the sector, it's always interesting to see from these surveys what utilities are kind of thinking about these different funding programs and the challenges they're facing there. So in this case, SRF, one of the most important, kind of federally funded infrastructure programs that we look at in a lot of detail, got a bunch of money through IIJA. And at this point, for the first time, in at least the past couple of years, more than half of utilities are actually trying to use SRF funding. We've seen this as something that's been kind of restricted to a lot of the larger, maybe mid-sized and larger utilities that have the kind of project management capabilities to actually apply for these things, try to apply for these loans or grants, or can hire consultants to do it for them. And so in this case, 55% of utilities are planning on using SRF funding, which is up from only about 1/3 of utilities in 2021. So a big jump in just the past 2 years. I think we're also increasingly seeing potentially greater access by private utilities, right? This is something that's kind of a legislative issue state by state, but there's also some federal stuff moving in terms of letting investor-owned utilities actually access these programs as well. And that could also open the door to just a greater number of utilities, more of the market actually getting access to this really crucial source of infrastructure funding.
Yeah, I think the jump, like you said, 1/3 in 2021 to almost, it was 55% in 2023 that are saying they're planning on using it. I think they're just, the SRF channel is that is the channel to market for a lot of these IIJA dollars. So if you want it, that's where you're going to have to go. I wonder how much of it has to do with that. In addition to, I think, the vendors and the solutions providers, engineers, they're getting savvier as far as helping their clients, particularly the smaller ones, in guiding them through the process. I think that's part of the equation, maybe not the biggest part, as far as driving those percentages upward. That's actually really interesting. In the IOU part, that's something appears that's likely going to pass when it comes to like access to clean water, SRF. I know the IOU is really interested in that. There have been a lot of lobbying efforts for that, and quite honestly, it seems right. As I mentioned, actually in the last podcast with Isabel Kesman, we talked a bit about the addressable market and the share of IOUs within the municipal water space. And the IOUs in which they actually, investor-owned utilities that have, multiple utility positions across different geographies, it's only 6%. It's pretty small overall. Obviously, American Water is the 800-pound gorilla, but and they have influence. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I agree with you, it's heading that way. So, all right, you got 4 there. What's the next one?
So my last one is a couple of points related to digital water. Obviously my wheelhouse here at Bluefield. It's always interesting to see how much they talk about digital. Certainly the coverage of digital water has kind of increased over the couple of years that I've been tracking these surveys, which is always nice. But one data point is in terms of cybersecurity. So the Black Veatch survey says that 96% of utilities see cybersecurity as either important or very important, which is, I mean, that's probably the highest number in the survey. 96%, almost all utilities see this as a major issue. And we certainly have seen that. I mean, in terms of activity in the market, in terms of vendor interest in cybersecurity, in terms of utility fears related to cybersecurity, really, I think have picked up significantly in the past couple of years, post-COVID, and with stuff like Oldsmar, the Colonial Pipeline, these massive kind of really high profile attacks. We're seeing this just becoming really, really top of mind for utilities. But what I think is interesting on the flip side here is that about 70% of utilities here surveyed think that cybersecurity should be self-governed, that there shouldn't be any regulation or kind of compliance standard related to it, which is, this is a big point of contention in the industry right now. There was some EPA directive kind of passed a couple months back in terms of requiring state agencies to actually, state primacy agencies to actually kind of administer cybersecurity surveys and kind of evaluations as part of their regular sanitary surveys. There's a huge pushback to that from the AWWA, among others, in terms of, kind of trying to find alternate avenues or ways that utilities can be in compliance there. So big point, big, I guess, issue of contention, and something that'll be interesting to watch how that plays out from a regulatory perspective. But I think it's interesting that on the one hand, this is seen as such a massive issue, but on the other hand, utilities don't necessarily want somebody else to hold them accountable for it. And there's other data points in the survey that speak to that, right? That it's a challenge because of resources and staffing, because of expertise, because of budget. Utilities don't have the resources to deal with this kind of thing. And I think, they know that they need to. They're doing what they can to get there, but if they're being held to the fire, they're not necessarily going to be able to meet those standards because, again, this is such a kind of a wide open, really challenging area for them, and it's just not something that your traditional utility director or treatment plant operator or asset management professional is used to dealing with.
Well, and I think it also gets back to your comments earlier about workforce, right? The tech workforce is at a different level and different skill set than maybe what many of these utilities are accustomed to. And I think you brought this number up before, and I've used it a number of different times in conversations with clients, but also even podcasts. But is it 85% of the utilities in the US have less than 3 employees? Is that the number?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the number. That's from, it's a couple of years old, but yeah, it's from like a AWWA survey. Yeah. So it's really interesting. And, it kind of really sheds light on not only, the resource levels of water utilities, but as we've talked about, there are 49 to 50,000 water utilities, another 23,000, wastewater systems in the US. So it's pretty significant number wise. But yeah, the cybersecurity thing is, we all look around that. We deal with it. Everybody deals with it every day in one form or another. We're all putting passwords in our phones. We're all logging into our emails using, there's all this, everybody knows about cybersecurity. We know about what it's like being hacked. We've all been spammed. The list goes on and on. But yet it is a huge endeavor to deal with. So not surprising in many respects. Related to that, let's just sort of, since you're the expert in digital water, anything to plug or anything happening in digital water, even outside of these surveys, that's worth bringing up? Yeah, we've been really busy on the kind of thought leadership front in the past couple months. The Bluefield kind of digital team has put out a number of white papers with some of our clients. Probably the most germane one to what we are just discussing was a paper we put out with AWS on cybersecurity for the water industry related and the kind of role of cloud providers. And this actually really speaks to this issue, the fact that kind of cloud-based systems, deployed via Amazon or AWS or other players, it's a way for utilities to get access to that cybersecurity expertise without having to develop it in-house, right? Without having to hire the, cybersecurity experts or deploy the kind of in-house IT resources. If you're putting stuff in the cloud, you have access to, kind of the best-in-class cyber protections of a massive firm like AWS. And so that's a big part of what we're talking about there. We did a bunch of utility interviews to understand how utilities are kind of making those decisions and weighing those trade-offs between cloud versus on-prem from a security standpoint. So super interesting stuff. Really great to work with the AWS team on that. We also just put out a new white paper on the digital water kind of sector as a whole with Xylem, where we spoke with a bunch of their clients, looked at some of the key, really kind of like actionable takeaways and insights for utilities in terms of how do you get started from a digital perspective? How do you kind of plan out what investments you're going to make and what your objectives are from a digital perspective? How do you bring your team along, your staff along for the ride? A lot of really good case studies there. Third white paper we did on the digital front with Esri, looking at the role of GIS. Obviously, that's kind of their wheelhouse, how GIS plugs into kind of broader, the broader digital water landscape and other types of technology, and how you can use GIS software as kind of the foundation for broader digital strategy. And then the last one is I'm also very involved in SWAN, right, in Smart Water Networks Forum. And we just put out a paper I guess it's been a month or so now, on innovation within the digital water sector and how utilities can, kind of what they can do from an organizational or a cultural perspective to try to incentivize or to drive innovation and digital adoption. So a lot of obviously interrelated, themes here, but really great to be kind of working with all those different organizations. I think, all those papers speak in a lot of ways to the issues that we're seeing in the industry with surveys like these, whether it be the Black Veatch survey, the AWWA survey, or just, broader kind of industry conversations in these areas. So a lot of cool stuff, and hopefully our listeners will get a chance to check some of it out.
Yeah, I mean, these white papers, for what it's worth, they're free to download. So you don't even have to pay Bluefield Research for it. So or anybody else for that matter. So definitely, I think you can find all of them on our white paper page. We have on our website. If you just go to the upper banner, I think in Bluefield Perspectives, there's a drop down for white papers. You can check all those out. Really interesting. Now that having written them down as you listed them, they are all digital, which is pretty interesting. I hadn't really thought of that. And the Esri one is the most recent one, is a follow-up. And we have a global one for Esri looking at global markets, and then we also have another one that is more US focused. But yeah, really good stuff. I know how much work goes into these things, not only from our team, both in the editorial, the content, the data, but also working with the clients. And I mean, quite honestly, and in all sincerity, they've all been great to work with. None of these have been, I'd say, challenging clients, so to speak. So I thought that's been great. So, thanks to AWS, Xylem, Esri, and SWAN, who's industry association, and they're doing great things as well. So that's been awesome. All right, Eric, man, lot to think about, lot to unpack. Any last takeaways before you get back to your deep, dark life that I just brought up? It's supposed to be great. I just know you just don't sleep much.
No, it's great. It's been a lot of fun. Yeah, we're getting all kinds of water-related baby books and onesies and stuff like that. So we're going to make sure she's a water nerd too. But no, nothing else. I mean, yeah, I think these surveys are really interesting. A lot of good stuff. A lot of good takeaways for utilities in terms of thinking about where they sit in the industry and kind of benchmarking against others, in terms of vendors really kind of understanding that, that all important product market fit, like knowing what utilities actually are up against and how they're prioritizing different issues, how they're kind of navigating macroeconomic or financial or technological or climate related challenges. I think it's just really valuable, right? And it's, kudos certainly to AWWA and to Black Veatch for taking the time to get so many perspectives. I mean, I know, again, from doing these reports with SWAN, where we're able to get 40 or 50 utility surveys, and that's pulling teeth. I mean, to get 4,000 is a lot. It's really impressive in such a fragmented industry. So definitely, as much as I would love to take credit for some of these numbers, it's a lot of work that goes into what these organizations are doing to get that many utilities on board with answering all of these questions, really tackling these issues in depth. So yeah, interesting stuff, and I'd recommend everybody to check it out.
Well, that's awesome, Eric. Thanks a million. And As we do, we will talk again soon, and hopefully others will get to speak to you soon as well. So thanks, and talk to you later.
Cool. Take it easy. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Cheers. All right. So for those not in the know, Charlie Suse, he's an analyst at Bluefield. He's been taking some time to do some deep dives into water management in Latin America, particularly on the private side. So I'm bringing him in for this conversation. The research he's been working on is on Brazil, the private water landscape, competitive positioning, and market trends. And really because it's hot in his mind and it's about to be released to our clients, thought it'd be a good idea to tap Charlie's brain right now and see if we can get a couple takeaways and some interesting tidbits about what's happening in Brazil. So Charlie, how's it going?
Good. Yeah. We just celebrated someone's birthday here in the office, so I'm stuffed with cookies right now.
Well, it's better than the one that I almost choked on before we started recording this. So at least I've washed it down with some good, clean drinking water. And the other upside of being a Bluefield research, in addition to having cookies for birthday, is not only do we get Juneteenth off, which is Monday, we get Friday off. So it's going to be a super duper long weekend for those at Bluefield, which I think has made everybody happy because it's summertime.
Yeah, we're looking forward to
it. Exactly. With all that fun stuff being said, Charlie, you've been looking at Brazil more recently, been doing a deep dive. We've looked at this in the past. You've sort of brought it up to speed. So why don't we just sort of start at the top? Why have we recently looked at Brazil and what's happening in the water sector there?
Yeah. I guess there's kind of a few things just off the top that are, interesting and worth considering. Obviously Brazil is a massive country, with a population that's expected to reach about 233 million, I think, by 2047. There's a huge water market there. And the sector's undergone some pretty significant changes as the country's pushing to achieve universal service coverage over the next 10 years by 2033. First and foremost, there's a new sanitation legal framework that's facilitating a more coordinated policy environment, as well as greater transparency and competition for private investment. That said, service coverage in Brazil has risen far slower than expected, and annual infrastructure investments have been less than half of what's needed to reach those universal coverage targets set out in 2014. So as it stands, about 84% of the total population has access to drinking water service, and only 55% have access to wastewater service. And the discrepancy along rural and urban divides is, pretty stark. And then, thirdly, there's been some recent political shifts in the country that have raised, some concerns about market stability. But from what we've seen so far this year, efforts by the Lula administration to scale back private participation have largely been unsuccessful, and concession awards have begun to pick back up, since a small dip in activity. But, as pressure builds for a lot of municipalities to demonstrate their financial capacity to meet these targets by 2033, there are scheduled tenders offering investment opportunities of at least $3.4 billion US dollars through 27 different tenders across 16 states and counting. So there's a lot in the pipeline.
So, that makes sense. It's a huge country, right? When we're looking at the Americas as a whole, obviously everybody gets excited about the US and Canada, just by the combination of the two, just the scale is massive. But Brazil is no small potato in the whole scheme of things. It has been a market that has drawn a lot of interest in various forms over the years. So with that being said, because we're looking really at private water, their bids, what is the competitive landscape, at least for concessions, in Brazil look like?
Yeah. So for context, historically, state-owned sanitation companies in Brazil have dominated the market. They serve nearly, about 3/4 of the total population with water supply and sewage services. But in the wake of, the COVID pandemic, economic uncertainty, In recent years, a lot of these state-owned companies have been forced to confront some of this mounting debt and engage the private sector in different, modalities, concessions, P3s, and in some cases, privatization. And then, another thing I would add is, there's been over 200 contracts awarded to the private sector since 1994, and there's plenty more on the way. And from what we've seen, these are really going to a core group of companies that have emerged in Brazil's concession market. Private operators serve about 22% of the total population, and that number is continues to go up as these new contracts get rolled out. And of that 22%, four companies account for over half of all the concession contracts, and 91% of the total population served by private concessionaires. And then with the two main players being AWWA and BRK Ambiental. But it's a heavily consolidated market on the private concession side.
Yeah, and maybe there's reason for that, and which leads to my next question, and that is, historically, it's been a tough market, right, for a number of different reasons to operate as a private investor or a concessionaire. Any perspectives on that? I mean, is that why it's consolidated, or what are some key reasons for it being a tough market?
Yeah, so I think obviously a lot has changed in the last 3 or so years since the new sanitation framework has been implemented. But as that framework continues to get ironed out, Brazilian companies with local knowledge and expertise and connections are much better positioned to navigate risks. A lot of the foreign international companies operating in Brazil are facing additional market entry barriers. And that's something that we definitely dive deep into in the report. But on top of that, the cost of capital is obviously high to operate in such a risky market as well.
And I mean, I would say beyond the concession market, we're seeing other things, right? I mean, we've talked to a couple of different companies. You seeing anything there as well?
Yeah. I mean, beyond concessions, I think international companies could see greater opportunities in the digital and industrial water and wastewater treatment spaces, particularly the metering market, where this kind of huge gap is unfolding and demand is only expected to grow. So we're anticipating, more opportunities in the digital space in Brazil. Yeah,
and I think it's interesting. I mean, one of the challenges for outsiders trying to get into the market are local content requirements. So if you're providing meters or any sorts of hardware, the content requirements for the country are extremely high relative to others. I know that fosters or enables more local domestic content and job creation, I suppose. But that's, I've saw that, we saw that in the renewable energy space, whether it be wind and solar, et cetera. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. But what I do look forward to is when this report comes out. I've obviously already seen a draft of it. It's going through production right now. And I know global clients are going to receive this. And it will be a good complement to one that you did on Mexico not long ago as well. So our Latin America coverage continues to increase and expand, building off what we've done in the past, but new changes in policy, like in a place like Brazil, is a good example of a changing environment that may usher in opportunities for investment. So with that being said, Charlie, this is awesome. Any idea when we can expect to see the final report?
I mean, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. Yeah, like you said, it's moving through production, and it should be out the door soon.
Okay, well, maybe production is going to listen to this podcast, and then the pressure will be on. But they're already slammed enough as it is, so it'll get there when it gets there. So be on the lookout, everybody, all the listeners out there, for Brazil. So Charlie, thanks for the last minute invite to join in on this. I was excited to go through the draft, but also thought it would be interesting for others to hear things other than what's happening just in the US. So thanks again.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
All right. Talk soon, Charlie. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. There you have it. That was a twofer, an unexpected twofer that we didn't exactly plan for at the beginning of the week, but now it's come full circle. So thanks to Eric Bendler for adding his insights on the state of the water industry, and to Charlie Suse for talking to us a little bit about Brazil. And lastly, I never give a shout out. I think I've done it once after 73 episodes. Big shout out to Mike Gaylor, who helps on the production side, piecing this all together. It's something that is way above my pay grade and much appreciated. So thanks to Mike for helping out the Future of Water podcast. And with that, before we sign off, if you are in Boston, let us know. We can set up a meeting. I'm not going to lie. We've got someone coming in the office next week to talk to us about the private water industry. Not only is it about the private water industry, it was about the podcast that we just released a week or two ago. So look forward to that conversation, but don't just let it be that person. Let it be you. So come join us. We're 10 minutes from the airport, 10 minutes from the train. Please subscribe to the Future Water podcast and give us a review. We like reviews, not for us, because it helps others know that we're hopefully doing a good job. Send us a note to waterexperts@bluefieldresearch.com with any topic ideas you would like us to discuss, because we're doing this for you, not us. And lastly, tell a friend about it. We all need friends, and we like when our friends are happy. So send them something interesting, that is, if they're interested in the water sector. This podcast and these water industry insights have been brought to you by the one and only Bluefield Research. To learn more about us, visit us at bluefieldresearch.com. Be well, be safe, take care, and we will talk soon.